Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid, where I take a look at the wonderful world of LGBTQIA++ news because stupidity is intersectional. Now, I ended last week's video discussing Monroe Bergdorf being dropped by the NSPCC for their upcoming campaign on LGBT youth. Now, as one would expect, Monroe has traded heavily off this, telling the BBC that she believes that trans people are treated as second-class citizens because a company dared to drop her as a representative. This kind of reaction was entirely predictable. This is what Monroe does, and in a way, I genuinely think that she probably wanted to be dropped. She is a professional victim, after all, and this is how she gets her name known. But the story doesn't necessarily end with Monroe, and one of the first things I want to touch on today involves the person who actually hired Monroe as the NSPCC representative, as Pink News has said that this person has received homophobic abuse. So let's take a look into exactly what has happened. The celebrity and talent officer at the NSPCC who is responsible for hiring Monroe Bergdorf has been targeted with homophobic abuse online. Twitter accounts have dug up photos of the employee in question wearing fetish gear and branded him a perverted narcissist who needs firing. A colleague of the man in question told Pink News he is getting a torrent of abuse from some Class A trolls. The mindset of these people is unbelievable. They're cowards. It's a disgrace, and he deserves a private life which is separate from his work life. The NSPCC has guidance for staff on social media, and if there was a problem, we would have taken action, an NSPCC spokesperson told Pink News. Journalist Chris Godfrey called the treatment of the employee insidious homophobia and wrote on Twitter, "Transphobes are now targeting the gay man who hired Monroe Bergdorf at the NSPCC because they found pictures of him online in fetish gear. The assumption is that because he is a gay man who is into fetish gear, cannot be safe around kids. This is homophobia at its most vile." Now, I think that people are entitled to their own personal lives, and the man who hired Monroe is no exception to this. I don't think having a fetish really means that this person would ever be a danger or inappropriate to be hired by anyone. People are entitled to their own kinks, and unless this comes directly into conflict with exactly what it is that they are doing, or if they bring their kink into the workplace, I wouldn't necessarily see much issue to it. Unfortunately, Pink News hasn't exactly given the full story here, as it turns out that this individual uploaded a video to a fetish site, I'm unsure which one, saying cub pisses and wanks in rubber. Now, again, he is entitled to his own fetishes, but wearing my rubber under my clothes to work, decided to film myself. I've not seen this video, so I don't know exactly where this video takes place. I have heard people comment that this was taken in a toilet cubicle. But this is incredibly weird. As I said, people are entitled to their own kinks, but you shouldn't be taking it into the workplace. And I find the idea of someone wearing fetish gear to their job highly suspect. And quite frankly, if the NSPCC is indeed aware of this, why are they okay with it? Why would they be okay with one of their employees wearing clothes that are basically meant to get somebody off going into work? You should be keeping your kink and your job separate. That should be common knowledge at this point, but apparently it's homophobic to bring this up. And it kind of reminds me a bit of, well, Jess Bradley whipping it out at the office almost a year ago. And by the way, Brad is still suspended for some reason. But the real story here isn't so much what this person gets up to in their private life, but it's being portrayed as homophobic. And I'm not too sure why. They've not explained why. The entire criticism this guy has got is that he's wearing rubber, and most of it involves him wearing rubber to work and then pissing and wanking. Could potentially be at work. That seems to be the real concern here. I've not seen anything mentioned about him being gay. And this just seems like a way of completely shutting down any kind of criticism that this man might warrant. And the conflicting homophobia with what's known as kink shaming, where you are, well, shaming someone for having a kink. Being gay doesn't mean that you are kinky. Nobody is discussing the sexuality here apart from the progressive media like Pink News. They are the ones who are bringing this into the centre, and they're framing it in a way where you can't remove one and the other. Now, I do always find it strange at Pride events, for example, where you get people dressed up in kink gear. I'm not talking about people wearing leather or that. I'm talking about you get the people dressed up as dogs walking around, you have people in full fetish outfits. And I always think that that in itself is a little bit inappropriate. This kind of conflation between being gay and being into kink needs to stop being pushed by, well, the queer community. Because they're the ones who do this now more than anyone. It used to be the religious right, but now it's the progressive left. Of course, they frame it differently, but the point of it still stands. I don't believe any of this is homophobia. I do think that whilst this person is entitled to their own private life, they certainly shouldn't be taking it into the office. So next story I want to cover involves a video that's been doing the rounds over the last couple of days, and this involves a teenager in Scotland who's kicked out of class by a teacher for saying that there are only two genders. Now I'm going to play a little bit of the video now just to kind of get a little bit of the context of what was being discussed.
Entitled to your opinion.
If I am, then why would you kick me out of class? It's not very inclusive of
Could I finish
opinion.
my sentence, please? Not very inclusive. No, I'm sorry, what you were saying was not very inclusive, and this is an inclusive school.
Yeah, how was what I was saying?
Because I was saying that what's wrong with the website is that there are more than one gender in this country.
That's
by law.
your opinion.
That is my opinion, and that is an opinion which is acceptable in the school. I'm afraid yours, which you're saying that there's no such thing as anyone other than male or female, is not inclusive.
Scientifically, there are just two genders. My
No,
opinion
I am not putting
my opinion has to stay
I
inside
am
my
not
house.
putting my opinion. I am not putting my opinion out. I am stating what is national school authority policy. Okay?
Well, it's not scientific whatsoever.
Not every policy is scientific, Brian. Not every policy is scientific, Murray.
Now I find this video quite worrying for a couple of reasons. First of all, children and teenagers should be encouraged to ask questions in school. They should be encouraged to debate, to discuss, to build on what their ideas are. And especially with something like there being multiple genders, because this is something which has only popped up in the last couple of years. I mean, even back in 2010, 2011, this was an alien concept within the trans movement. And now all of a sudden it's becoming the accepted narrative. But that's not what is really concerning about this. It's the fact that the teacher tells him that he's not being inclusive because what the governing body has said is the only permissible opinion here. The authority says so and that's it. Do not question authority. It's just appeals to authority and nothing else. I don't think many people really buy this idea that there are multiple genders. Whether it's people that I know personally or other trans people I know, not many of us do believe that there are infinite amounts of genders. And I'll bring up the point again of where do you draw the line? What is and what isn't a gender? Is the moon a gender? But then the teacher also makes quite a strange point when the student points out that the idea of there being unlimited genders isn't scientific. The teacher responds by saying, well, not every policy is scientific. So they've got no factual basis in which to really tell people they have to follow this, and yet they're forcing it on people anyway. But this is a good look at what exactly is going on, not just in schools, but in any kind of learning establishment at this point. One narrative is only being pushed. This is a narrative which ignores trans people like myself. We haven't had a say in this. And yet, in our name, this is being pushed on people who really have no idea what any of this even means. They just have to accept it, and that's that. But this is a highly authoritarian move. This is something which should indeed worry a lot of people. So the last thing I want to talk about this week is connected to the brutal assault on a lesbian couple just a few weeks ago. For those who don't recall, a couple were assaulted on a London bus by a group of teenagers for not kissing for their amusement. The attack was brutal, and I believe it was condemned across the political spectrum. So Channel 4 actually caught up with a couple just a few days ago, where they discussed what they felt that the attitudes were towards LGBT people in the UK. And then the interviewer dropped this question.
The man who's likely to be the next Prime Minister of this country, Boris Johnson, has in the past made some pretty homophobic comments. He's called gay people bum boys. He's also compared gay marriage to bestiality. How would you feel about him being in charge?
I do not think that Boris Johnson is fit to lead anything, much less the United Kingdom.
So that was quite a strange question to ask, and to be honest, Boris Johnson seems to have this record of being a raging homophobe. Such a question isn't the first time this has been raised in the last few weeks. After Theresa May said that she was going to resign, Gaystar News ran with this interesting article calling Boris Johnson one of the worst possible prime ministers for LGBTI people, saying that he has an absolutely disgraceful record on gay rights. It turns out his record actually isn't all that disgraceful though. Whilst he hasn't necessarily been at every single vote for gay rights, for example, he missed the vote on same-sex marriage, he did vote to repeal Section 28. He's also been quite vocal in his support for LGBT people, but what Gaystar News and Channel 4 in particular focus on are comments which he made almost 20 years ago at this point, which are admittedly quite tasteless. Now, I'm not surprised that Channel 4 would bring these comments up. I mean, Boris Johnson did snub their wonderful Tory leader debate. Whilst I didn't watch it, from what I've heard, it sounds like Boris dodged a bit of a bullet there. Apparently it was a complete train wreck. But these comments were made so long ago, and they're now being used to hold over his head, saying that this is how abhorrent Boris is towards LGBT people. Now, I don't quite buy it. Boris has been quite supportive of gay rights. He was involved in London Pride when he became mayor. I don't think it's fair to hold these admittedly tasteless comments over him and not allow the man to change. I'm not saying this as a fan of Boris Johnson. In fact, I don't quite know where I stand on him. But it's reasonable to assume that people's attitudes would evolve and would change. I think that Boris has been able to put his money where his mouth is. And I can see why a lot of people would have problems with the man, but his attitudes towards LGBT people really shouldn't necessarily be one of them. But what are your thoughts on the stories that I've covered this week? I apologise that this is a lot shorter than usual. However, I've got quite a lot going on at the moment. I am in the process of moving. I did want to get a video out because I did want to touch on a couple of these stories. So, I apologise for the length. Longer ones will be coming. I know I keep on saying all of this. But thank you all for sticking with me, and thank you all for your support. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and also hit the notification bell, and I will see you all next time. And a special thank you to Kim, James, Sarah and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.